The Pacific jungle was alive, but not with life. It pulsed with fear. A Japanese officer lifted his binoculars to scan the ridge. Nothing, just heat shimmer and the buzz of flies. Then crack, one sharp sound. He collapsed before his men even heard it. They hit the ground, eyes wide. The forest stared back, silent. Somewhere beyond 1,000 yards, hidden in the glare of the sun, an unseen hand had just ended him. The shooter was a U.S. Marine, face streaked with mud, breath calm, pulse steady. His weapon, a Springfield M1903A1, topped with an 8x Unertl scope nearly as long as the rifle itself. It looked old-fashioned, clunky, even primitive next to modern automatics. But in the right hands, it was surgical. He adjusted the focus, exhaled, and fired again. Another target fell, a single precise whisper across a mile of jungle. The Japanese soldiers never found his body, never saw his face. They started calling these men the silent ghosts. They believed the Americans had invisible demons picking them off one by one. But it wasn't demons. It was engineering and discipline. A rifle the Army had almost scrapped, resurrected by the Marines into one of the most accurate killing instruments of World War II. Every shot was math. Every breath, a calculation. And behind that glass scope, a handful of men redefined what it meant to fight and what it meant to wait. This isn't the story of tanks or fleets. It's about a different kind of power, the kind that kills without noise, without mercy, without ever being seen. This is a forgotten war fought through a single scope, the M1903A1 Unertl sniper rifle, and the men who made it legendary. Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, 1941. The armory echoed with clanking bolts and the scent of gun oil. Rows of Marines stood at inspection, their rifles gleaming under fluorescent light. Most held the Army's new pride, the semi-automatic M1 Garand. But in the corner, a few men were handed something different, something older. The Springfield M1903A1. Bolt action. Slow. Heavy. Unfashionable. One private laughed. We're fighting a modern war and they give us antiques? What he didn't know was that this so-called relic would soon terrify an empire. The Marine Corps didn't care about fashion. They cared about accuracy, the kind of precision that didn't need 8 rounds a second. The Springfield could place a bullet where it mattered most. First shot, first kill. And with a master's touch, it could do it at 1,000 yards. But precision demands patience. It also demands obsession. Marine armorers reworked the rifle piece by piece, hand-lapping the bolt, glass-bedding the stock, polishing the bore until light ran through it like silver. Then came the scope. The 8x Unertl, a long, steel telescope nearly as tall as the rifle itself, with exposed springs and delicate adjustments that punished any mistake. To the untrained eye, it looked fragile, but in the hands of a trained marksman, it turned distance into domination. One Marine marksman later said, "You don't aim this rifle, you breathe with it." In training, they learned to judge wind by the sway of grass, humidity by the taste of air, mirage by the shimmer off their barrel. Shooting wasn't just ballistics, it was meditation. The instructors called them patient killers. They spent hours in prone position, motionless, staring through the scope until insects crawled across their arms. If they moved, they failed. If they blinked too long, they missed. These weren't just soldiers. They were craftsmen. Every shot they fired had a signature. By mid-1942, the Marine Corps had quietly built an elite group. Men who could hit an enemy officer at the edge of visibility. And yet, outside the Corps, almost nobody knew they existed. The Army dismissed them. "The bolt action's obsolete," one general said. "We fight with volume, not precision." But the Marines were preparing for something different. Something the Army hadn't faced yet, jungle warfare, where every shot would count and visibility would shrink to the width of a heartbeat. That's where the M1903A1 would shine, because in close terrain, chaos favored the patient. By the summer of '42, the rifles were sealed in crates marked simply special equipment. No press coverage, no headlines, just quiet efficiency. The Marines didn't talk about these rifles. They let the results speak. During final range tests at Quantico, one instructor lined up a silhouette target at 1,000 yards, nearly the length of 10 football fields. He handed the rifle to a young sergeant named Chuck McMillan. "Show me if this thing's worth keeping," the officer said. McMillan nodded, adjusted the scope, and took a single breath. The shot echoed like a whip crack. When the smoke cleared, the bullet hole sat dead center, one clean punch through the paper heart. The officer blinked. "Lucky hit." McMillan chambered another round. "Let's find out." The next bullet hit the same hole. From that day forward, no one called it obsolete again. The Marine Corps officially adopted the M1903A1 Unertl sniper rifle as a precision weapon of choice. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't fast. But would soon prove one truth every marksman knows. Speed is loud. Accuracy is final. By autumn, the rifle shipped west across the Pacific. Few men would wield them. Fewer still would master them. But those who did would rewrite the balance of fear. Because in the jungles of Guadalcanal, the Japanese would soon learn that silence could kill faster than sound. Camera pans over crates marked USMC sniper equipment. A faint echo of surf and distant gunfire rises. They said the bolt action was dead. Then it started hunting ghosts. Guadalcanal, 1942. Heat shimmered off the jungle like breath from an open oven. Marines crouched in the mud, their helmets streaked with sweat and insect bites. Somewhere ahead, the enemy waited, invisible, patient, watching. That's when the first sniper team went to work. 2 men, 1 rifle. A world shrunk to the view through an 8 times Unertl scope. The shooter lay flat, cheek pressed to wood polish by oil and salt. Beside him, the spotter whispered ranges, counting seconds between gusts of wind. 400, 6 now. A single crack split the jungle. A Japanese scout dropped before his squad even heard the report. Panic rippled through the trees, voices shouting, branches snapping. But there was no second shot. The silence was worse. It wasn't just killing. It was control. Every time a Marine sniper fired, entire units froze. Patrols stopped marching in daylight. Officers crawled instead of walked. The Japanese began calling them the unseen demons. Their commander started hanging helmets on sticks, hoping to draw fire and find a ghost. Nothing answered. The M1903A1 had come alive in its natural habitat. Humidity thick as soup, air so heavy that bullets curved through it like whispers. The Unertl scope fogged, lenses beating with sweat. The Marines learned to strip and wipe it without breaking focus, using cigarette paper to dry the glass. Every variable mattered. Mirage lines, leaf movement, even the shimmer from a barrel too hot under the sun. A single breath too fast could send a bullet wide by feet at 1,000 yards. They learned to time heartbeats, to fire between them. One sniper's diary reads, "We became part of the island. You wait until the birds settle again. That's when you shoot." By Tarawa, 1943, the technique had become science. Snipers crawled into the sand before dawn, wrapping themselves in seaweed for camouflage. They used coral heads as rests, turning the tide pools into mirrors for range finding. A Japanese officer once waved his sword to rally a charge. He fell mid-gesture, the blade flashing as it hit the ground. The shot came from 900 yards. The soldiers froze, staring at the empty ridge. No smoke, no movement, only fear. Reports from Marine HQ began using strange new language: psychological disruption, enemy, hesitation, area denial by precision fire. The rifle had become a weapon of the mind as much as of steel. But mastery carried cost. The men behind the scope started changing. They spoke less, ate less, slept lighter. Killing became a calculation that never turned off. You start hearing your own heartbeat louder than the war, one wrote. Still, the command kept sending them forward. A single sniper could do what an entire platoon couldn't: stop movement, protect a flank, break morale. The slow bolt action that everyone mocked was reshaping the battlefield. And yet, the Japanese were learning, too. Scouts began to study the pattern of shots, to map the kill zones. Soon, for every trigger pull, there will be an echo coming back. Camera lingers on a jungle clearing. The echo of a distant shot fades. They feared bullets. Then they learned to fear silence. They were ghosts long before they vanished into the jungle. Most of the Marine snipers came from ordinary places, farms, small towns, open fields where hitting a rabbit at 50 yards meant dinner. The Corps didn't recruit them for muscle. They chose them for temperament. Calm, patient, detached. Anyone can pull a trigger, one instructor said. We're teaching you to wait for it. At Camp Lejeune, recruits learned more than marksmanship. They learned invisibility. Camouflage wasn't paint. It was psychology. They'd smear mud on their faces, but they also trained to think like terrain, the slow breathing until their pulse matched the wind. Then came the scope. The Unertl 8 times, with its long sliding tube and exposed springs, punished clumsy hands. A careless knock would throw 0 off by inches. They were told to treat it like glass because it was the first rule: protect the scope and it will protect you. One marksman, Sergeant Chuck McMillan, could shoot so still that the crosshairs never drifted off a dime at 200 yards. Another, Corporal Franklin Jones, practiced at dawn every day, reading mirage lines until he could estimate wind speed by how the air danced above his barrel. Their patience became legend. One exercise lasted 14 hours. Each man had to crawl 100 yards without being spotted by instructors armed with binoculars. If a leaf moved wrong, fail, the last to make it back received his sniper patch. The others started over. But patience cuts both ways. In combat, the waiting could stretch for days. Lying motionless in mud, mosquitoes biting, thirst gnawing, mind circling one thought: is it worth it? For these men, the answer was always the same: yes. At Iwo Jima, Sergeant William Bill Brophy held a ridge alone for 2 days, firing only 3 times. He killed 3 officers and broke the entire platoon's advance. When asked later how he picked his shots, he said, "You look for whoever moves like they're giving orders." Another sniper recalled the odd intimacy of distance. You see them through glass for so long, they stop being enemies. They're just people you can't let live. That sentence would haunt him for the rest of his life. Behind every perfect shot was a cost. Detachment guilt, sometimes obsession. Some snipers began keeping journals not of kills, but of distances, as if numbers could wash away faces. Yet despite the mental strain, they became the Corps' most effective force multiplier. One confirmed sniper team could account for 50 to 100 enemy casualties over a single campaign. Entire Japanese patrols refused to advance once the first man fell. To keep morale steady, the Marines rotated their snipers often. But the jungle had its own gravity. It pulled them back. They couldn't leave it behind. They'd lie awake, eyes open, hearing phantom echoes of shots that hadn't been fired. Back home, letters to family spoke of guard duty or long observation posts. The truth was too hard to explain. What could you say? I watched a man breathe for an hour and then stopped it. These men weren't killers by nature. They were craftsmen serving necessity. One rifle, one life, one decision that had to be perfect. They learned a paradox the rest of the world wouldn't understand until decades later. The more precise the weapon, the heavier the conscience. Camera pans across faces in black and white photos, calm, young, unreadable. They learned the art of perfect stillness and the cost that came with it. The quiet that follows a sniper's shot is a dangerous thing. It gives enemies time to learn. It gives commanders time to adjust. By 1944, the Japanese had tasted the sting of the M1903A1, and they were not idle. Silence breeds suspicion, and suspicion breeds method. At first, their answers were simple. Move at night, travel in groups, never show an officer's silhouette. But the Marines had already forced changes in behavior with a single, patient bullet. Now the Japanese developed their own counters. Camouflage, decoys, and increasingly counter-snipers. The duel had become mutual. The Japanese Type 97 rifle was not an exact match for the Unertl-equipped Springfield. Its optics were smaller, its ammunition inconsistent, and jungle humidity played tricks on glass. Still, skill can make up for gear. A handful of Japanese marksmen, trained in mountain and fieldcraft, began targeting the American spotters, the men whose job was to reveal range and confirm hits. Strike the spotter, and the ghost loses its eyes. On Peleliu, the island's carved coral ridges became chessboards. Marines found helmets mounted on poles, leaves clipped to perfect angles, and logs wrapped in cloth to look like sleeping men. Decoys were everywhere. Patrols advanced in daylight less, and in terror more. Each time someone tested a helmet pole, and nothing shot back, they felt a little braver. Then the real shot came, precise and deadly, and the fear returned tenfold. The counter-snipers didn't only aim, they learned to bait. One method adopted by Japanese teams was a feint move. A small group would deliberately expose themselves in a place that seemed safe, watch the ridge, and when a shot came, they traced its origin and returned fire. It was a brutal school of cause and effect. The lesson for the Marines was immediate. Vulnerability existed not just in position, but in pattern. At Iwo Jima, the duel turned personal. The island's volcanic soil and ruined airfields gave birth to long-range hide-and-seek. Marines reported duels that read like folk tales. In one pocket of the island, a Marine sniper named Bill Brophy waited for 2 days for a single high-value target, an enemy commander directing mortar fire. For 48 hours, Brophy never moved more than an inch. Then he took one shot, watched the man fall, and packed up without a word. The Japanese replied with their own marksman the next week. Brophy's spotter was hit through a gap in the foliage. The hunter had been hunted. These encounters taught Marines something cold. Every confirmed kill made a new target. For every officer felled, Japanese units adapted. Shields in the form of cloth-wrapped logs, false heads propped above trenches, and elaborate netting to break up human silhouettes. Night movement increased, and so did paranoia. Patrols that once strode with confidence now crawled. Orders were given in whispers. The jungle, once a place of hiding, became a hall of mirrors. Counter-snipers also exploited the limitations of the Unertl. Long external scopes had clear advantages in magnification and precision, but they were vulnerable. Exposed springs and a long tube could catch on branches. Their weight could alter the rifle's balance. And in the heat and salt of the Pacific, lenses fogged, coatings clouded. A Japanese marksman who could force a duel at close range, inside a few hundred yards, could negate the Unertl's long-distance edge. Marines learned to carry secondary weapons and to trust support teams to keep their position secure. But adaptation cut both ways. The Marine snipers evolved too. Spotters became more skilled at calling wind and mirage. Teams began staggering shots to confuse counters. Some snipers began using double hides. One visible position baited to draw fire, and a second concealed rifle ready to answer. They improved camouflage, using local foliage not only for concealment, but to change the visual signature of a shooter. The Unertl's long tube was wrapped with matte cloth to break shine. Lenses were treated with grease and cloth to prevent immediate fogging. The duel became a science of small tricks. And then there were the psychological duels. A sniper's reputation could do as much damage as a bullet. If a unit believed a ghost waited on a ridge, it would abandon territory, shift supply routes, and shorten patrols. The Japanese used this against the Marines by spreading rumors of hundreds of unseen shooters, exaggerating reports until entire islands fell haunted. In response, Marine intelligence sometimes leaked the opposite. Plant reports implying several snipers were planted in one area, forcing the enemy to waste resources searching for ghosts that didn't exist. One brutal episode on a Pacific atoll crystallized the cost of that invisible war. For 2 days and nights, 2 expert marksmen, one Marine, one Japanese, exchanged single, patient shots across a volcanic gulch. Both men fired less than a handful of rounds. Each shell found its mark. When the duel ended, only one walked away. The other's unit retreated, morale broken by the image of an unseen shooter who had read the terrain, heartbeats, and habits. Historians later called such duels micro-campaigns, tiny battles with outsized effects. What emerges from these stories is not a simple list of kills, but a portrait of adaptation. The Unertl-equipped M1903A1 has forced the Japanese to change how they moved, how they hit, and how they feared. In turn, Japanese ingenuity forced Marine snipers to refine their craft. Each side raised the other's cost of action. The battlefield became not just about firepower, but about patience, deception, and will. So, what did the Japanese learn? How did these countermeasures alter entire operations on islands like Polilliu and Iwo Jima? And if silence could be weaponized, what did that mean for commanders trying to keep men moving, fed, and alive? The answers would come in blood, in reports filed between shelling, and in the quiet notebooks of men who spent days waiting for a single heartbeat to betray a life. The next chapter looks into the long shadow these men left behind, on tactics, doctrine, and the modern sniper's creed. Camera holds on a lonely ridge, the wind rustling leaves. A single spent cartridge glints in the sun. When ghosts hunt ghosts, no one sleeps. The war ended, but the echoes of a single bullet did not. Long after island flags were lowered and ships sailed home, the M1903A1 with Unertl scopes left fingerprints on doctrine, training, and human mind. In the years after 1945, Marine after-action reports filed in neat service folders showed a pattern. Small numbers of precision shooters could produce outsized strategic effects. Supply convoys rerouted, patrols shortened. Entire defensive plans were altered because one ridge was haunted by an unseen man. Military theorists noticed. Sniper doctrine migrated from the shadows into doctrine manuals. The idea was no longer heresy. A well-placed shot could be a force multiplier. But the legacy split in two directions, hardware and habit. Hardware first. The Unertl scope success taught engineers what mattered: optical clarity, repeatable adjustments, and stability in harsh environments. Unertl's long tube would later be replaced by lighter sealed optics, but every modern sniper glass carries the Unertl's fingerprints. The lesson was simple. If you want surgical accuracy, you must build the instrument like a surgeon's scalpel, precise, durable, and cared for like a living thing. Habit was deeper. The Marines kept the ritual of patience. Sniper school curricula wrote new chapters. Wind reading, mirage estimation, heartbeat timing, even ethics of distant engagement. Snipers became not only marksmen, but battlefield psychologists. Their work forced commanders to think in degrees of risk and fear. How do you feed men who are afraid of a ghost? How do you move convoys when the enemy might pick the commander off from a mile away? Those questions reshaped planning. There was also moral residue. The men who had pulled those long, deliberate triggers came home with stories they could not tell in parades. Many returned to farms or quiet towns, stared out windows for hours, and sometimes refused to speak of the faces they'd seen through glass. A few wrote letters that mentioned distances and conditions, but avoided names. The craft of distant killing leaves a loneliness you can't measure in reports. How do you reconcile the intimacy of watching a life through a crosshair with the public abstraction of enemy casualties? That dissonance became part of the sniper's legacy. Public memory is uneven. Monuments list regiments and battles. Museums display damaged helmets and rusted bayonets. But the long, Unertl-equipped Springfield often sits in a dim corner, plaque understated. Service Sniper Rifle M1903A1. Visitors pause, read, move on. Yet every so often a student stops long enough to watch the glass glint and to ask, could one man change an invasion? The answer echoes in General Staff reports. Yes. Modern sniper doctrine still carries direct lines to those Pacific hideouts. The USMC's sniper school folded the Unertl lessons into new frameworks. Marksmanship married to patience. Science married to craft. The sniper's role expanded beyond assassination, reconnaissance, counter-sniper identification, and shaping the enemy's psychology. In Afghanistan, decades later, lessons from islands like Polilliu and ridges in Iwo Jima reappeared in desert winds and mountain mirage. Distance matters. Silence matters. The oldest truth remained. A disciplined shot can force an entire army to behave differently. There's also a quieter legacy in training culture. Instructors adopted an old Marine practice. Rotate snipers often prevent the mental weight of prolonged hiding. They taught spotters to be as skilled as shooters. They insisted on journals, not to tally kills, but to record conditions, choices, and quietly, feelings. The idea was to normalize reflection. Modern militaries call it resilience. The idea was born in mud and salt, under the tutelage of men who learned that surviving battle is not the same as living afterward. Then there's the story of adaptation. The Japanese countermeasures forced innovation. The duel between hunter and hunter produced new camouflage techniques and even influenced small unit tactics. By forcing both sides to change, those snipers accelerated doctrinal evolution. What began as a bolt-action curiosity became a crucible of military learning, teaching both sides about limits and costs. If you stand before one of these rifles today, you notice the handwork, lap bolts, custom bedding, the delicate marks on a scope's turret. You can almost read the maker's hand. Careful, meticulous, proud but grim. It's easy to romanticize that craft. But there is a harder truth. Precision kills at scale create more reverberations. The same technology that removes chaos from a battlefield also demands a higher standard of judgment. Who gets targeted? Why? At what cost? Those questions move from quiet barracks arguments into formal rules of engagement. Finally, legacy lives in people. The surviving snipers told their stories in small rooms, at reunions, for curious historians. Their faces crease when they describe a line of wind or the taste of morning air before a shot. One veteran said simply, "We learn to wait. Waiting changes you." Another added, "You can be precise and you can be wrong. The distance makes mistakes crueler." Their testimonies help build modern training that aims not to glorify killing, but to teach responsibility. So the M1903A1 with its long, unertl glass did more than kill 1,000 yards. It forced armies to rethink movement. It forced engineers to refine optics. And it forced humans to ask what discipline does to a soul. The Marines' bolt-action ghost left a blueprint. Patience as power, discipline as doctrine, and a hard lesson that sometimes the smallest tools remap entire wars. What does that mean for us now? How do we remember a weapon that was accurate enough to change tactics and quiet enough to leave moral shadows? Do we honor the craft and also reckon with the cost? Those are questions historians still wrestle with, and they're as important as any ballistics table. They fought without noise, but their echoes still shape every sniper alive today. If the quiet of a single shot surprised you, the next story will unsettle you. One marksman who turned a tiny atoll into a one-man fortress. Subscribe and step with us into the hidden mechanics of war, where patience becomes power and a single bullet still decides far more than a life.